But there is a question. This is self-report data. Self-reports, you cannot rule out that people might have given us the answers that we want to hear. What else changes with these questionnaires? So there's a very important enzyme, telomerase. I believe you heard about telomerase from Liz Blackburn at the Menla Conference on Health. Telomerase is an important dynamic enzyme that repairs chromosomes and is related to the self-report data. These are the telomeres at the ends of your chromosomes in your cells. So DNA...
And it plays, if His Holiness's understanding is right, it plays an important role in the immune system.
So this is actually, when cells divide, they cannot completely replicate the telomere. It gets shorter. And when the telomeres get too short, the cell stops dividing. It's about an aging process. This enzyme repairs and lengthens the telomeres so cells can keep dividing. So this is important because loss of telomere length predicts death in men. Telomerase...
Why men?
That's the test, the study.
Okay.
So it's human.
But why
so why I said men is because the data, the study is just a few weeks old, is this publication, and it looked at men for 12 years, and it's a biological process.
So
So yes, it's not only men.
It hasn't been done on women.
This study was not done on women.
Yeah.
So no, we all have the same biological process regarding this. So telomerase can lengthen telomeres, and telomerase activity goes down in mothers who are caring under high stress for children who are chronically ill. But telomerase can be upregulated. It can increase with strict diet, exercise, and a healthy lifestyle. This was just published in September. So based on this, we'd predict that telomerase in a meditation retreat environment might increase. So we measured telomerase at the end of the first retreat in the white blood cells, that part of the immune system. And in fact, we found that the control group had less telomerase than the retreat group. So we found a 30% higher level of telomerase at the end of the retreat. But does telomerase relate to individual differences in psychological change? So one of the questionnaires we had is a well-being questionnaire developed by a colleague of Richie's. And there's a scale on that called Purpose in Life. When you score high, you have goals in life and a sense of directedness. You have beliefs that give life meaning. If your score is very low, then you lack a sense of direction, a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose. The retreatants, this is a measure here of telomerase. That's the level of telomerase, and this is the change in purpose in life from the beginning of the retreat to the end of the retreat. As people's purpose in life changed, there was an increase in the level of telomerase that was measured in those individuals. The control group showed no relationship at all for this measure. The same...
So it's basically comparing the self-report versus...
Self-report versus telomerase.
So there's a scale.
Yes.
So how you score in that scale versus...
the level of telomerase in the white blood cells. We found the same pattern for self-acceptance. Higher telomerase was also related to increased contentment, increased agreeableness.
I'm just explaining because in contentment it can mean something else.
Yes.
In terms of material needs, So this is just general sense of well-being.
Right. Decreased neuroticism, and our overall measure increased adaptive functioning. But this was true for both retreatants and controls. The point is that telomerase is related to psychological traits. So this argues against a strong response bias in the self-report questionnaire, suggesting participants were truthful. But I am not saying that meditation alone raises your telomerase or results in longer telomeres or lengthens your life. This is for future work. This is going to be ongoing, and
No. So that seems to contradict your findings. So why can't you making the claim?
Right. So there are two aspects to this. One aspect is that for some measures, the retreatants change and the control group does not, even when the control group changes on the questionnaires. There are other measures where the control group, they're home, they're not in retreat, they're not meditating more than their daily practice, but they're planning to go on retreat. Their sense of purpose, their sense of well-being, they may change. And so if you put everybody, if you put them on the same scale, the retreatants may overall have a higher value of the questionnaires. But on that scale, the control group is, as the control group is got higher scores, their telomerase is also increased. The other aspect is that the retreat environment is not just the meditation practice. So I was just, before I go on, I was going to say that Adele is just interested in doing in other traditions, and Richie's colleagues and also Richie's work is going to carry this further. So now I want to move to perception and attention findings. So we have developed a task that is very difficult and often very boring. But Alan is making strong claims about shamatha practice, and we need a strong test. So here is the task. You are looking at a dot, and you're going to see a long line, and that long line is not the target. You're going to then sometimes, only 1 in 10 will you see the target, which is a short line. In this task, it's going to be like an executive control task. You're going to press a button every time you see a long line. Whenever you see a short line, don't press the button. But we make it harder. We make it very hard to tell the difference between the long line and the short line. When things are perceptually difficult, it's very hard to maintain sustained attention. So we adjust the difficulty for each person before we begin the test. And that's a kind of process like this. So if you look at the dot, you see a long line, now you see a shorter line. You see a long line, now you see a longer short line. You see a long line, now you see a longer short line. You see a long line, and you see a tiny bit shorter long line, a short line. Now, you might not be able to tell the difference. So if that is the case, and you start making mistakes, it's actually going up, and we can't even, or at least I can't tell whether it's a long or a short line anymore. And then it starts to get easier again. And right at that level where you get about 75% right, that's your threshold.
So this is an attempt to kind of, capture the vividness component. Is that the idea?
Yes. And it also makes the task have the same difficulty for different people. If your eyes are very sharp, you might be able to tell a very small difference. If you have poor vision, your glasses are not good, then you might not, your threshold might be someone else's pretty easy line.
And then there's basically one longest line, so that's shown first as a kind of a bar.
Yeah, you are always seeing the long line, and then you're making a comparison. So in this sense, it involves a bit of working memory.
And you're also testing for stability, aren't you? Because
that's the next.
Okay.
That's next.
Good.
So what we find in the first retreat is that the thresholds were the same between the groups. We did it at slightly easier levels, so that's why these lines are higher. But starting at the midpoint testing, the control group is not seeing as vividly as the retreat group. This is a measure of the difference in visual angle, just the space on the screen taken up by the difference between the long and short line. And this is significantly different for the retreatants, are sharper in their perception at the beginning, at the middle, and at follow-up. We mailed laptop computers to everybody when they went home and had them turn their bedrooms into laboratories so we could get this measurement after the retreat. We found the same thing in the second retreat. So at the beginning, this is their overall level, and their perception improved and stayed at follow-up. But maintaining the improvement at 5 months depended on continued shamatha practice every day, which varied anywhere from 1 hour to 10 hours, because some people, as Alan mentioned, are still in retreat.
Yeah, there was a Gishi who passed away. He had reached the 7th level in the stages of attentional development. So he was very good.
We'll check with them.
His Holiness is asking some of the retreatants, at what level of the mental stages of attentional development they are. And Alan's response was most of them are somewhere between 5th and the 6th, and there was one who is probably on the 7th. And then His Holiness's question was, does that mean that when you say 10 hours a day, how are the hours divided? So Alan said 3 sessions of 2 to 3 hours, or maybe 4 sessions of 2 to 3 hours. And then His Holiness's question was, does that mean that during this session of 2 hour long, are these individuals able to maintain their sustained focus single-pointedly upon the object with no distraction? And then Alan's response was, yes, but I was interjecting.
Sure, with some
saying
questions.
that,
But also, it was quite difficult for them because they didn't simply have a retreat center they could go to and stay. And so because America is not set up for long-term retreats, they would be in one place and then they had to move. Visa would run out. Like visa. Some Mexican students, the visa would run out. What we found, though, is when they were in retreat, they would come to maybe the 4th, 5th stage. Then they'd have to be out of retreat. They have to move, and everything is like that. Then they would go down, but they would come back up quickly. So whatever they achieved, if they had the 4th stage, we found that quite homogeneous. You must translate what he said.
I was saying that the suggestion that these retreatants are able to maintain their single-pointed, sustained focus with no distraction for a period of 2 hours, I said, it's very difficult to take. And His Holiness was saying, that's because you haven't trained yourself.
They can't debate as well as you can, Jamila.
So, from the Vajrayana understanding, if a practitioner is able to sustain one's attention without any distraction, unwavering, for a period of 1/6 of a day, which is 4 hours, then one has really attained quite a high level of attentional development that one is able to then apply to any other activity.
Then focusing certain place
in the body. Which can actually have a physical effect on that point where one is focused on.
Then can will affect subtle energy.
Right.
So the samadhi just is meant
Focus. No.
Mobilize.
Channel. No.
Then
different points in the body.
Then actually, mobilize energy. Then combine the losing yin dota.
So shamatha practice is, in a sense, a technique that one learns to channel the power of one's attention and mind. And then once you have gained that, then one is then able to actually use the mind to affect energy level changes in the body.
So it was following one of the classic texts that you take the 24-hour period and divide.
So if there is among the practitioners someone who has been able to kind of undo one of the channel. So in the Vajrayana physiology, so in the Vajrayana physiology, there is an understanding of different points, vital points of the body where there are chakras, kind of interconnected network of channel conduits, energy conduits. So, and then there is an understanding that through practice, one can gradually open these networks, and then through which the energies will flow. So His Holiness was saying that if he knows that anyone who has even at least managed to open one of those, he will send to Richie's lab.
And your expectation was that.
But don't expect too much soon. But I don't want to interrupt, but I'm just curious because I've heard that from attentional scientist point of view, the average attentional capacity of the mind is supposed to be very limited. So, I mean, given that, but even, there is a kind of understanding. So I'm wondering, Cliff, as a scientist, have you used that kind of test to see whether there is any distraction at all? And how can you indicate that their attention is fully sustained?
We don't have an ability in real time to look at someone and say, right now, they were distracted unless they're doing a task all the time, and they make a different kind of error. So we have attempted to do a task that is very difficult. This is why we made this task. But we don't run it for 4 hours. We run it for half an hour. And when you set the threshold and you do the instructions, it takes 1 hour just to do this one task. Because we look at the threshold again at the end of it. And we do it 2 ways. Press.
Yeah, but how can still that prove that the attention is sustained?
They began with 3 months, but we have some now who've gone on almost 2 years. But with some interruptions, because it's hard to find a good retreat place for long term. That's why we're creating one. Nobody achieved that in 3 months.
Let's follow this up.
We could talk about Friday, tomorrow afternoon, possibly thinking about designing tasks that could look at long durations of sustained attention. But in the West, there has not been the subject population. Typical undergraduates in college are often what we use for subjects and experiments, and we don't meet too many who can have unbroken sustained attention. So let me just tell you the stability part of the same experiment, and it's a response inhibition task that's similar to what Adele showed. So what you're going to do is everybody get out your button, your little index finger to put on something you're going to tap. And every time you see a long line, tap. Whenever you see a short line, don't tap, withhold. Now here, since I can't test your perceptual thresholds, the short line will be very clear. So here we go. Anybody tap? So that just gives you an elementary experience of this task. Matthew has opinions of it we can talk about. So we found that there were improvements over the course of the retreat in this task. So this is a measure of your accuracy, and this is the 32 minutes separated in 8 blocks of 4 minutes. So at the beginning, everybody starts out doing very well, and then they have an initial decrement, they decrease, and after about 16 minutes, they fall off and they remain pretty poor. This is at the beginning of the retreat. By the middle of the retreat, their performance has improved. By the end of the retreat, it is improved further, and particularly these improvements.
So why at the end there's a little dip there compared to the middle?
At the very beginning, there's something.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning, there's a
Yeah.
dip.
This dip?
Yeah.
Oh, this.
So at the beginning, why?
This is
Well,
not
there
a
is a dip.
significant. This is just a slightly different overall level of accuracy.
No. The question
But
is
do you mean
that
this or
why
this?
why
This?
there is a first dip that
This first dip.
just
In
a
most
standard.
vigilance experiments, after 5 minutes of a boring task, people start doing poorly. Now, it's interesting that for this task, changes in perception were not related to changes in improvements in response inhibition. It suggests that the training really was training improvements in executive function, that wasn't just getting perceptually easier. But performance was related to a task that I haven't described for mind wandering. And most interesting, performance was related to adaptive functioning. Those individuals who showed the largest global improvements in their psychological functioning also showed improvements in response inhibition. So this kind of ties this very large psychological level to this very simple task. Now I want to talk about emotion-related changes. I'm going now to show you a film. This is a graphic film. I need to give an advisory. So we've already had a strong image that was still this morning from Liz. So what we did is an experiment to show powerful, emotionally evocative images and look at people's facial expressions as well as their self-report. And one of the things that the purpose of the experiment is, does this contemplative practice give you greater access to your experience no matter what kind of experience it was? So if you don't want to see some gory images, don't look at what's coming up. You're going to see a film here, and this you'll see her facial expressions while she watches the film. And now we need sound for the movie. This is in Iraq. Beginning of the Iraq War.
War happens and the fighting starts, it's kind of like we're pumped up, motivated, ready to go.
It's the ultimate rush, because you're going into the fight to begin with, and then you got a good song playing in the background, and that gets you real fired up, ready to do the job.
You can hook your CD player up to the tank's internal communication
Charlie box.
So that way when you put your helmet on, you can hear it through the helmet.
This is the one we listen to the most. This is the one we try when we kill the enemy. Johnny Pool at the body set the floor is just fitting for the job we were doing.
Because we're not.
Who's the enemy?
This was a lot more real and true than just a video game. A lot of people thought it was just me. Oh yeah, look through the sight and shoot. No, a lot of this is face to face, and especially riding by after some of the bombs have went off and seeing all the people on the side of the road bloated up and just all the smells around you. I mean, from the people lying dead, rotted, and it's a lot more gruesome than you think.
We called in with some artillery and some napalm and things like that. Some innocent women and children got hit. We met them on the road, and they had little girls with noses blowing off, and like husbands carrying their dead wives and things like that. That was extremely difficult to deal with because you're like, shoot.
Okay. So I want to say a few things. The first is that we created this experiment as a strong test. All the material Alan approved. We did not show this kind of a film in the middle of the retreat. And I also want to say that soldiers are not representative of that kind of immature attitude. After people viewed the film, we show them a storyboard to remind them of what the film had, and we ask them to rate on a scale different emotion terms, different feeling terms, and when their feelings changed with what they watch. So retreatants' emotion ratings, their self-report, differ from the control group. So this was at the end of the 3-month retreat. During listening to this soldier talk about listening to music and going out to kill, the retreatants were significantly more embarrassed. They were also more distressed.
Most of them are Americans.
But interestingly, later on, when you see the victims, the retreatants showed significantly less reported contempt. So is this the growth of compassion?
Yes.
What does the face say? So now I'm going to give you an example, very quickly, of how we code facial expression. So this is just 10 seconds of her facial expressions.
Do you know your background?
Do you know the background of this woman?
We have information on her.
You have the information.
Well, we have the information that we have for everybody in the retreat.
I'll tell my background.
She was, by the way, not a retreatant. This is a control participant. So here, this is how we code. I'm going to just show you very quickly. This is Paul Ekman's coding system, and I won't explain the details of it, but to show you that there is a emotion dictionary of facial muscles that turn into expressions we can identify as of a given emotion. And there are complex blends of these, and some we don't have definitions for.
Muscles
these
are registered through
muscles
how are they registered? They are registered through
this is coded by individual trained coders who look at the video frame by frame, and they are intercoder reliable, so two people come up with the same answers for when muscle groups. This is very atomistic. They look at specific regions of the face and code the onset and offset time.
But it's done visually.
It's done visually by a person. Computers are trying to, there's a lot of work to do this automatically. So this just goes through the different expressions. All of this work took about 100 times longer than to look at the expressions. So if we look at this, we did this for 29 people, and for the full, I'm at the end here. So for the retreatants, across the time of that whole 2.5-minute film, longer durations of sadness were related to more daily compassion practice.
So just to be clear, how much they spent on specific shamatha practice and on compassion and the 4 immeasurables, that was up to them.
That was up to them, but
there was no standard dosage.
Well, Alan gave half-hour guided meditations, often every day.
Minimum dosage, 1/2 hour. Minimum, 1/2 hour each day. Some 1 or 2 hours, I think, maximum.
So what?
I'm talking about the actual practice of the 4
So
immeasurables.
when you guys talk about sessions,
minimum.
For 1/2 hour in the group, and then in addition, individually, that was up to them. Again, maybe 1 hour would be average.
No, it's actually a little lower than that. So,
yeah, but it's still not very clear what kind of dosage people were getting when they were doing their own retreat.
So
because
we
you
have
kind
the
of a package. You have quite a lot on offer.
So
how do
here,
you...
So this is going to come out in some of the data that I'm about to show you, because we have measures. Everybody tells us what they do in their own room in terms of sessions, and we have an average amount of compassion practice they report doing, because we have 80 or 90 logs of every single day, and so we have a database of how many minutes of practice a given individual did. It was not on a group schedule. So there's a lot of individual differences. So that allows us to make relationships between what we see and how much meditation they practiced. It's not all in one schedule. So a higher percentage of meditators than controls express sadness in response to specific scenes of suffering. These scenes. And this is statistically significant. This is the percentage of participants who showed sadness expressions during these specific scenes. And it's higher in the retreat group. A very interesting finding is that we took meditators and we separated them on the basis of whether they showed anger, disgust, or contempt, rejection emotions, or they did not. And when you just group the retreatants who show rejection emotions versus those who did not show rejection emotions, the people who show rejection emotions spent less time in compassion meditation. That's here. And that's statistically significant. This is the coding of the actual face. This is actual face.
Okay. And then you later correlated with how many hours they have.
Yeah, so we have the database of compassion practice, and we have their measures of their expressed emotions. So these results suggest that the practice of compassion meditation.
But in English we'd say it entails, from Paul Ekman, contempt entails a sense of moral superiority. This person is worse than I am.
Yeah, but I don't think that's enough, though. That's the thing.
Oh.
I think that the way Paul Ekman does use it is, as Alan described, it implies a moral superiority.
I think there's more.
It's negative,
there's more to it.
There's a sense of disgust.
It's disgust plus moral superiority, because it's not simply arrogance or a sense of I'm special.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe a fusion of that kind of arrogance and
there
disgust.
actually are elements of the facial expression that include elements that are in the disgust expression. So there is some share.
This is a contempt expression in a participant. You see this kind of smirk. So finally, these results suggest that the practice of compassion meditation decreases expression of potentially destructive emotions, although we cannot say much about causality until we look at the responses to films at the beginning of the retreat. Now, the results I just showed you, they were finished April 3rd. This year.
Right.
So,
6 days ago.
6 days ago.
Yes.
I got the slide in India.
Right.
So we have some questions, but that's the end of the presentation, and then we have some questions for discussion.